paid good money to see this movie. When they go out to a theater, they want cold sodas, hot popcorn, and no monsters in the projection booth.
Everyone pretend podcasting isn't boring.
Turn it off. Turn it off.
Malpertuis, ça signifie le repère du renard. Le renard, bien sûr, c'est le diable.
Des ombres. Il est si noble, si généreux et si bon. Allons, je sais que vous me haïssez.
Cette odeur de santal, c'est affreux.
Mathias? C'est ma volonté.
Ça sert cet argent.
Mon rat est fini.
Magnifique.
Welcome to the Projection Booth. I'm your host, Mike White. Joining me once again is Mr. Matthew Asprey Carriere.
Your obedient servant, Mike.
Also back in the booth is Ms. Jessica Shires.
Hello.
We are kicking off a very special month, which is both a month of Patreon requests and also our Shocktober selections. This one comes to us from our very own Jessica Shires, also known as Legend of Doomhouse. Malpertuis is a gothic horror film starring Matthew Carriere as Jan, a sailor back at his home port, where he visits the estate known as Malpertuis, where he encounters a group of colorful kooks, including the formidable Cassavius, played by Orson Welles. We will be spoiling Malpertuis as we go along, including the big twist at the end of the film, so if you don't want anything ruined, turn off the podcast and come back after you have seen it. We will still be here. So Jessica, as the person who requested this one, when was the first time you saw Malpertuis and what did you think?
So the first time I saw it was probably when the Barrel DVD came out, which is, I think, the only American home video release to date of the film. I was a big fan of Daughters of Darkness, huge fan of that film. And I had heard that Kumel had done this other film that had similar lines along the fantastique, and the descriptions of it sounded really great. So I thought I would seek it out, watched it. Didn't entirely make sense of it the first time, not surprisingly. I was very intrigued by it. And it was quite a few years before I watched it for a second time. And at that point, I had read the novel. I was very interested in Belgian art, Belgian literature. And so I was able to put all the pieces together, and it meant a lot more to me. And I was able to understand it, such as it is, a bit more the second viewing. I'm also a big fan of Sylvie Vartan, who has a small role in the film. So I was really intrigued initially to see it because of her, and her role in it, albeit small, does not disappoint. I just wanted to mention that. And being a fan of Daughters of Darkness, last year I did a pilgrimage to the hotel where Daughters of Darkness was shot in Ostend, Belgium. And there is a star for Kumel on the sidewalk outside the hotel where some of the exteriors were shot. There's like a star in honor of Kumel's career.
Oh, that's
very
fantastic.
Nice. Yeah.
Nice. And Matthew, how about yourself?
This was a film that was run on Australian TV in the late 1990s. And I remember the Orson Welles appearance was what attracted me to, I think, taping this film on television. But it was one of those movies that I never really properly sat down and watched from start to finish. It was always, I think I looked at the Welles scenes and then it left that on the shelf for a long time. And it took me actually years to finally get around to properly sitting down and watching the whole thing. I had very much associated this film with a dreamlike atmosphere, which I think it really does have. And when you've only seen fragments of it, it seems even more dream. But now, so coming back to it years later, 2 years ago, I was putting together a course on traditions of the fantastic in cinema. And I was looking at the French fantastique, and this doesn't quite fit into that since it's Belgian, but I did come back to this film again. And so I'm very intrigued by this movie. I will say that. And the Orson Welles appearance is its own kind of separate, fascinating bit of history. But beyond that, the film, I think, is just very fascinating on its own.
I think this was a definite first-time watch for me for this show. So thank you very much, Jessica, for choosing this one. I was really happy seeing it. And it had been one that I had wanted to see for a long time. I don't think I'm making this up, but I'm pretty sure that I have a friend in Toronto who does a ton of film screenings, and I believe he has done screenings of it. And he's had various responses to the movie. Some people, it's way too slow. Other people just eat this up. So I had heard about it, there's this strange film with Orson Welles in it, and that kind of was the hook, but not enough to actually make me watch it. And then thank you again, Jessica, for saying, yeah, let's do this one. Finally sitting down, I was excited to see both more Welles as well as another Harry Kumel film, and it did not disappoint whatsoever. I had a great time with this. I started with the shorter version, and we'll definitely talk about the versions of this as we go along or in the second half of the show. Finally caught up with the long version. It had been long enough in between that I couldn't be like, oh, for sure this is new to me or that's new to me. It all felt of a piece. It just felt more of it. Unfortunately, the longer version is all in Flemish, and so there is no Orson Welles voice. I think you hear his laugh, but that's about it, which is really sad because that's half, what would you guys say? Half of an Orson Welles performance is the voice, because that voice is just like melted butter in your ear.
Oh, totally.
That's certainly true, but I guess the vocal performance is another discussion point too, because at this point in his career, Welles was sometimes taking unusual approaches to his vocal post-synchronization. And in fact, there was another film he made around this time, Treasure Island, that was an extremely unimpressive vocal performance from Orson Welles, to the point where the distributor of the film in the United States hired another actor to redub his performance. clarity that we associate with Welles as a speaker was not always present in this period of his career.
This movie has just an amazing cast on top of Orson Welles. I love that it starts off with Matthew Carriere as Jan, or Jan, but I think it's Jan. And I like that in the book chapter that you shared with us, Jessica, he was spelling it Y-A-N-N. I was like, I think it's just J-A-N, but okay, whatever. He's great. I love Michel Bouquet as Didalou. Him showing up very early in the movie in his little bowler hat and everything. And then also Daniel Pilon as Matthias. Those two together, I think, are great. And the Didalou character, I really like him. Bouquet plays him as so many characters are being played as very impish, but he's very good at being impish. And it's such a different, because I just saw him a few months ago playing a very uptight boss in the Francis Weber film La Jouette, The Toy. So definitely plays it a lot differently than Jackie Gleason would play the same role in the American remake.
Yeah, he was an and he actually just passed away, like just not only a few years ago. He lived quite a long life and had a massive filmography. And in this film particularly, I've seen him also in a lot of very serious European films. But this isn't a serious European film, but it's the physical comedy that he brings to this performance is something you so rarely see from him. He's absolutely hilarious. He doesn't even have to be speaking, and just like his movements, his body language, his facial expressions are just absolutely hilarious.
And this is such a journey for this character of Jan, starting by coming into port in his very smart sailor suit and thinking that he sees his sister and pursuing her. The whole movie starts off with a image of the Jabberwocky from the Lewis Carroll poem. And then there's even a quote from Alice in Wonderland. And I think there's a couple lines throughout the movie that make reference to Alice in Wonderland. So him chasing after this woman that might be his sister, might not. It's so White Rabbit. And he goes right down the rabbit hole into, I think this is supposed to be a bordello is what I'm guessing, but what a wild space for him to go into. And then Didalou is the entree into the whole Malpertuis, I don't want to say sequence, because the majority of the film takes place in Malpertuis. And it is a fantastical land where we don't know what the hell's going on for so much of this. And on purpose, it's very surrealistic. And just that this whole space of Malpertuis is like, 6 or 7 different locations all stitched into one. It just goes on forever.
Yeah, and I feel like that's intentionally so, because I think Kumel really wanted to give you the sense that you don't know exactly where this is. You also don't know when this is. It's like vaguely 19th century, but really it isn't specified. It didn't specify what city it's in. It's just somewhere in Flanders. So there's this sense that places are connected in a way that doesn't really make visual sense, but somehow it all comes together. I think that sort of uncomfortableness is definitely intentional.
It's also the fact that we almost never see the exterior of Malpertuis. There's a couple of fragmentary shots of the exterior, but otherwise that lack of, we see the gardens and so on, but so you don't really see the house itself. So that contributes to this sense of very vague architecture when you're inside the house.
And Kumel was doing some interesting things like with the stairway. And I just was talking about the film Naked and how important stairways are in that one. And stairways are definitely very important in this. And whenever I see a stairway, and especially somebody going down a spiraling stairway, I'm just like, that's probably a descent into madness. And this whole movie is that. I love what Kumel does where he actually shows you the stairs going down and then takes the shot and reverses it to show you the stairs going up. So it just looks like the staircase is infinite. Like you don't know how high it goes up and you don't know how high this goes down. And there's a very prominent shot of him coming down, Jan coming down a stairway and just over, and you get this kind of repetition of him coming down the staircase. And I'm just like, oh, that's really nice. And you get that and him going through hallways a lot. You get this like maze-like, it's almost Vertigo-like with the way that he's chasing perhaps Nancy. And again, this space of the town that he's in is impossible. And to your point from earlier, this is in several towns. I think this was Ghent and Bruges, and I'm not sure if there was a third location. So again, Thank you. So Kumel just stitching all of this stuff together too to make an impossible city for an impossible house.
Yeah, it was funny. I was rewatching the film today, and in watching those scenes again, Malpertuis, the house itself, is very much its own character and is alive in its own way. And to me, I think of the way the staircase is, it serves as like a spine. If you think of the house as almost like a living being, it's like this sort of a central pillar, but it's also like the nerve center of where so much of the action takes place, is like going up and down stairs. Or so I just saw it as a sort of spinal column kind of metaphor in a way.
I can totally see that, especially when you get up to the attic. And for me, an attic in a movie is like the real subconscious, like what's happening in the brain that the rest of the house isn't aware of. To have that workshop up there, and I'm trying to remember the character's name, the taxidermist, is that Filaret. And what a performance by Charles Janssens. Just his laugh and his little voice that he does, and it sounds very similar between the English and the Flemish versions. I love what he's doing, and I love that he's just bonkers, fucking bonkers. If anything, he's the Mad Hatter of this picture.
Yeah, I think it's just to go back to the actors and the casting for a second. A lot of the sort of lesser known, at least to a sort of English speaking audience, of the actors were just like people people that Kumel knew from Flemish theater, Flemish television, things that just wouldn't be known really outside of Belgium. And they're just like some of these smaller characters are just like give wonderful performances. And I've had to go and look them up and, who is this person? And so I think Kumel really had a knack for casting. I think both in the sense of like these grand actors he cast, such as, Orson Welles or Delphine Seyrig in Daughters of Darkness, but he also really knew how to fill those smaller parts, I think. And yeah, I just think that speaks to how much of an actor's director I think he is. I think he's, aside from maybe some of these big personalities, he seems to work well with some of the actors. I know that's not entirely true, because there's Danielle Ouimet in Daughters of Darkness, who apparently wasn't treated particularly well, but I do think he had a special relationship with his actors, and they were able to deliver these really great performances for him, even for characters who had smaller roles.
He definitely did not like Orson Welles, though he respects Orson Welles, but he really can't say very many nice things about him quite often, especially the challenges that Welles was throwing up at this point, and the whole thing of, I want to wear this fake nose. And then Kumel's just, I got to come up with the whole lighting scheme. Kumel cannot say enough nice things about his director of photography, Jerry Fisher. He talks about him so much on the audio commentary, and just all of the inventiveness that he presented. And some of the real heart of the film goes to the cinematography and just some of the things that Kumel was doing around. I know he points out that he tries to light Jan, if woman would be lit, and then Nancy, Jan's sister, tries to light her as a man would be lit, and then even gives us like a porthole behind Jan, and then I'm trying to remember, the narwhal tusk for Nancy behind her. So this whole like gender play that he does, which then totally brings to mind the one character's mother from Daughters of Darkness, which is obviously a man in drag, which I love that. I love that.
You're completely right about the Jerry Fisher and Kumel's. Kumel is, I would say, in debt to him for how amazing this film looks. But I think Kumel acknowledges fully in multiple interviews and in the commentary how much he owes to Fisher and how much he enjoyed working with him. And they seem to have an amazing collaboration on the film. It's almost like Fisher co-directed it in a way. It just seems like his involvement and his influence on the film are so strong that he definitely deserves all the praise that Kumel gives him. Oh, but I was going to say the lighting and the way that Jan looks. I've seen it argued in various reviews that Matthew Carriere is not really great in this role. I think Matthew Carriere is a great actor and he has some better roles, but really, I think you can tell he was chosen for his looks here because he has that absolutely beautiful angelic look and he's lit accordingly. And a lot of the shots remind me a lot of the way men are photographed in Pink Narcissus or the photographs of Pierre Gilles, almost campy, like very soft, very beautiful, very feminine. I just think that's interesting. So Kumel seems not afraid to play around with gender for sure.
I absolutely love what they do in this brothel scene, and just how, speaking of lighting, and then just the way that the colors pop, those giant female forms that are on either side of the stage, and the background of the stage almost looks like an open mouth to me. And then you have the singer, and you've got all of these other women there with these big wigs on, especially their multicolored wigs, like very bright. I think it looks so good. And just wild with the female forms, especially you've got the I guess they're probably made out of wood, but the women, there's one who's got her hands over her crotch, but her boobs are exposed. And then right next to her is one where it's her from the back, or a different woman from the back with her butt exposed. And just to watch the singer going through this whole setup that they have with this beautiful place, with just, again, the reds are everywhere and it looks so good. And then you have just tons and tons of guys dressed in their sailors' outfits, which Jan is a sailor. And then I love that in the longer version of this, you get the little kids. And I think it's actually the same little boy, where you see a little boy in his sailor's outfit. And then there's another one who comes out of a storefront and he looks all ragged and he's got like a Tiny Tim crutch and he's coming out. I'm just like, are these other versions of Jan? Is this where he could be or was? Because I talked about a twist at the end, but there's actually a couple twists to this. This probably is all in Jan's head. So I would not be surprised if these other little boys in sailor suits are just other incarnations of him.
In the shorter version, you lose the kid on the crutch asks Jan, where is Bachelor, which is the same place that Jan was looking for, where he was from. And that's cut in the shorter version. I think they eliminated that, kind of keep it moving a bit faster.
Yes, I much prefer Malpertuis to Legend of Doomhouse, and especially just as a title, because Legend of Doomhouse that's awful. That feels like something that you would find in the dollar bin at Suncoast.
It definitely sounds cheap.
So bad.
I guess nobody knows how to pronounce Malpertuis, though, until they see the movie.
That's
outside
true.
of Belgium.
Yeah, no, I thought for years that this movie was called Malpertuis.
There's other ways to pronounce it, I'm sure.
Yes.
Yeah. I actually had never really realized in the times I'd watched it where that word came from etymologically. Obviously, mal and so bad and house are rooted in there. And apparently it is from a 16th century fable, and it's where a fox lives. So it's like a fox's den. And Jean Rey, the writer of the novel upon which Malpertuis is based, used that as a metaphor for the house and changed the letters a little bit. And so that's the genesis of the title.
Yeah, Jean Rey's a fascinating guy. I was not familiar with him at all until starting to do the research for this. And yeah, very interesting career. And I can't say I enjoyed reading the book Malpertuis just because it shifts on a dime. It really reminded me of something like the Saragossa manuscript, where you just don't know, like you're reading it and you're just like, I have no idea. The next paragraph could be in a completely different place. It could be completely, all these surprises are just hiding around the corner. You can't really predict what's going to happen in this.
Yeah, it's an enormously complex book, even more so than the film is complex. And it was considered to be unfilmable, right? Possibly rightly so. And we, for those who read the book, realize that basically what Kumel does is take a sort of segment of the book and use that as the narrative, and then make some references to things that happen outside of that segment of the text. But it's polyphonic, the novel. Like, it's multiple narrators, it's multiple periods in time. It's just like separate stories that merge onto each other. So I think Kumel's approach in adapting that was, and John Ferry, to his credit, who is the screenwriter, were able to actually make something that was a mostly narrative film out of this unfilmable book. And it's funny. So the book was written in 1943. And for those who aren't familiar with Jean Rey, he is a leading figure of the Belgian literary fantastique. And a lot of people compare his book Malpertuis to The Call of Cthulhu by Lovecraft. I haven't read that one, to be honest, so I can't speak to the comparison, but a lot of people see some similarities in the story there. But it is very much So Jean Rey was mostly a short story writer. He wrote detective fiction, but he's he's one of the most famous 20th century writers in Belgium. And he does these stories that involve the fantastique. And whereas it's not, he wasn't a fantasy writer per se, because he worked, and again, to define what the fantastique is, it's like a convergence of a fantasy world or supernatural elements with the real world. And so whereas a fantasy novel could be set in an entirely supernatural world or a made up world, fantastique sort of deals with the tension between the surreal, the supernatural, and real life. That's the definition of the fantastique, is the sort of the tension between the two. So he worked in that genre. And he was, as you say, quite an interesting figure. He made up a lot about his life in interviews, and he claimed to be a sailor, which we can see in Jan's character. He was actually not a sailor. People he was. So he made up quite a lot about his life. And what's funny is Kumel also inserts a lot of nods to Jean Rey in the film. I think you see early on in the film, Jan stops outside of I forget exactly what the store is. It's like some kind of hardware store or something like that.
Nautical store of some sort.
Something like that.
Because the guy's working on nets, and then you have that diving suit next to him. Yeah.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, exactly. And so the name of the store is H. Dixon. And one of Jean Rey's most famous literary characters was a detective called Harry Dixon. So a nod there to him for sure. So yeah, there's a couple little nods to Rey throughout his film.
Apparently, Alain Resnais was very big fan of Jean Rey and wanted to actually do a movie based on some of those Harry Dixon stories, also known as the American Sherlock Holmes. I don't know if that was their subtitle or I think it was. I think they were building him up to be a little bit bigger. But yeah, I thought that was nice. And then I also thought, you mentioned Jean Ferret, the screenwriter, and there's a lot of times in the commentary track too where Kumel will be saying, oh, the screenwriter wanted this, so I gave it to him. And that diving suit, he's the one that came up with that. Or there's a part with, and I'm going to have a hard time because Susan Hampshire plays multiple characters. I think it's when she's Nancy, the sister character, where she's getting money out of this place they're called the Color Store. And her hands, I want to say, turn red while she's getting the money. And I was like, oh. And he said, yeah, the writer wrote that. And I thought I would follow suit. I would do what he wrote. I was like, oh, how nice of you as a director to actually do what the writer is asking for. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. And unfortunately, my understanding is that Ferry's screenplay was tampered with quite a bit by the studio. And I guess we'll probably talk at some point about how this was a big studio project and their involvement in aspects of production that produced different outcomes. But yeah, so I think, I don't know in what ways the screenplay was tampered with or exactly, what, but I know anecdotally from hearing Kumel in the commentary talk about it, that it's not exactly as written by his screenwriter. It suffered from some interference.
I mentioned Nancy and Susan Hampshire, and one of the big reasons too why this feels very surreal is that she does play multiple roles. And she will even be in shots with herself. They use a lot of body doubles for her. And they do such a good job. There are too many times where you're watching an actor who is playing multiple roles. I'm looking at you, Eddie Murphy, and a few other people where it's just, okay, yeah, this is Eddie Murphy in makeup, or this is Eddie Murphy in a fat suit. Of course, Eddie Murphy does pull that stuff off very well. So I'm sorry to pick on Eddie Murphy, but with this, back in 1971, and Susan Hampshire playing these multiple roles, there were times where I had to check myself and say, oh, that's the same actress. I can't even believe that's the same actress, especially when she's, let's just say, the Gorgon. She looks so different. The way that they've shaped her nose, the way that they've given her green contacts, which were not easy or nice to put in back in the early 70s. I still remember Michael Jackson and all the problems he had with those contacts in the Thriller video. They didn't come up with good contact technology until the 90s or 2000s. So back in 1971, this poor thing wearing these green contacts was just suffering. I think the daughter of the producer, who's also on that commentary track, is talking about how they would put belladonna in her eyes to numb them because it hurt so much. Talk about suffering for your art.
I watched recently the Star Trek episode with Gary Lockwood with silver contact lenses, and he can barely keep his eyes open for the episode because you see how painful that must have been in the 60s.
Yeah, I think they do a fantastic job of hiding her, but they don't go out of their way, at least for me, to say this is the same person. It's not like a gimmick. And I just think that it's another layer of the surrealism of this, because you've got one actress playing multiple characters, and then also some of those characters are not humans. And we should probably say one of the big twists of this movie is that when Jan makes it to Malpertuis, which I'm assuming is his childhood home, he's coming back home, and there are all of these weird people that are living there now. And all of them, except for, I think, Cassavius, the Orson Welles character, they're all gods. They are all the original of Greek gods. And so you get hints here and there as far as, oh, this person's playing some notes. Okay, that's probably Apollo, the god of music, or like this person over here is Vulcan, or this person over here is Hephaestus. Sorry, I always fuck up which one's the Greek and which one's the Roman. So apologies if I do that tonight. But you find out throughout the course of the movie, and especially there's a big reveal, that Cassavius has captured all of these gods and basically has them doing his bidding. Most of these gods are now house servants, and they've forgotten who they are. And I keep screwing up the character's name. I keep forgetting, but the crazy little guy who's the taxidermist, had him sew all of these gods into human skin. And there are moments where they remember, and there's other moments where they don't. And I love this, and that they're all trapped there and it almost feels like for his amusement to have all of these gods that he has power over. Jessica, you mentioned the kind of almost palimpsest way that this is written. That's one of those stories, is you're peeling back that onion because you have multiple narrators, like you're saying, and so many of these narrators, it's fragments of stories, or I collected this manuscript. That's, I think, again, why it reminds me of Saragossa manuscript, because of the multiple levels and layers that you have. And I love that stuff. I absolutely love when you have a story that changes as you go through one narrator to another, and then have to figure out where they are in relation to each other, as well as in relation to history.
Yeah, I totally agree. The book is difficult, especially on a first read, but it's wonderfully written. And you really do have to occasionally stop and say, okay, what exactly is going on here? But I think just the way he does that with different voices and different stories all interwoven, it is just brilliantly done. Although Jean Rey himself was not a surrealist, he was championed by the surrealists, especially the French writer Raymond Queneau. He wrote in a similar style in some of his works. I can think of one novel that he wrote that's very much, you don't know where you are in time, or you jump back and forward in time. It's very surreal. It's like a classic text of surrealism. And Queneau was a big champion of Jean Rey in this novel.
Maybe to come back to Susan Hampshire and having to act within this type of labyrinthine structure, I think part of the reason that her different characters seem so distinct is also in the performance. It's not just the fact that her makeup and hair is so effectively distinct. I think she really does seem like different people in each of her incarnations.
Oh, yeah, completely. And it's not like she's, oh, now I'm the evil woman, so now I'm can't really twirl her mustache because she doesn't have one. She doesn't add on. She doesn't overact this stuff. It's so subtle in some of the roles that she's playing. And I can't remember if they're the Furies or the Fates, but the three women that are there always knitting stuff. And I love how the knitting turns into snakes at one point. But when they're knitting things, she's very nondescript. She does stand out as far as she's the youngest of these three women, and is probably the most interesting one. She's got the most dialogue, I think. But it's not, look at me in this different role. And when she stands out as Nancy, I love the blue dress that she's wearing and that she's coated in this blue color. And Kumel, again, is so concerned about the colors and the color scheme. I love how careful he was with what colors people are wearing, what colors different objects are. I love that big red, and I don't know if it's a stone when Jan wakes up and he's looking around. He thinks he's back on his ship because there's a literal porthole right there and all of this nautical stuff. And I'm guessing, is this his bed from when he grew up? Did he always want to be a sailor? Is that why there's so many nautical things? Or did they just set up this place to make him feel comfortable when he woke up in this strange bed?
He doesn't seem to know that he's at Malpertuis until the reveal comes, and then he becomes very irate about it.
Yeah, this is made a little bit clearer in the book. But initially, when you meet the character of Jan and he gets off the ship, he goes looking for his child at home, which he's told has disappeared. And Malpertuis is actually Cassavius' house. So it's not clear. I think the first time I watched it, I didn't really understand that either, because it's more important in the book because of the way the stories interconnect, that Jan's house is separate from Malpertuis. But yeah, so they're different spaces.
Okay, I did not pick that up at all. Thank you so much.
So yeah, he's dismayed to be there, I think, because of Cassavius' bad reputation, and he doesn't want to be there. He wants to go home. He doesn't understand why Nancy has also come to Malpertuis, and his Elodie, his childhood nanny, they've all come there. All these people from his various parts of his past and his family have just landed in this house, and he's just not happy about it.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that's just his brain putting them all there and melding them all together? Because ultimately this does, or allegedly is, a fantasy of his.
That's a really good question. I think Kumel suggests that it is. I don't know. Again, just to compare it to the book, I think in the book it's a little more separate, but I think Kumel probably liked that idea that it was all a dream. He even says of the whole film that it's a fairy tale, it's a fantasy. So I definitely think he could be riffing on the idea that this is all going on in Jan's head.
Something that's very key to the fantastique in the French tradition anyway is that ambiguity. You have these intrusions of potentially supernatural or events, but they're very much in the perception of the character. So whether they're hallucinations, dreams, or some kind of supernatural reality remains open-ended in a lot of that type of fiction. I think this film carries that type of approach to its conclusion.
I'm really glad that we talked about A Virgin Among the Living Dead recently, or last year, I guess that was, just because this reminds me a lot of that too, with the way that we are going to a house that doesn't exist or has our main character.
He's told doesn't exist. Yeah.
He's just like our main character in Virgin Among the Living Dead. And then when you get to this house, you're just like, who are these people? This is quite a collection of just very odd characters. And then you get the big reveal at the end of that. Oh, they've been dead this whole time. And she's actually in this, isn't she in an asylum in that one?
Yes, she is. It's so funny because I had honestly never thought about how similar the narrative is to Virgin Among the Living Dead, which obviously I love. I chose that one. And as I'm watching it in one of my recent rewatches for this, I was like, well, I even made in my notes, it's just, oh wow, it's just like Virgin Among the Living Dead. There's several similarities throughout the film to Virgin Among the Living Dead, which I was just delighted to be able to make note of. And not to jump to the end too much, but there is the scene at the end of where all the relatives, I'll just say, come back. It's very much like the end of Virgin Among the Living Dead. It just reminds me so much. I think the scenes are so similar.
Another film that came to mind is The Hourglass Sanatorium, the Polish film. I'm not sure if you've seen that, but this idea that you enter this house, in that case it's a sanatorium, and all the usual rules of time start to vanish. And the protagonist of that film too encounters people from his childhood, and it's all in a very free-flowing phantasmagoria, just like in Malpertuis.
No, I totally agree with that. And even some of the color scheme, because that's the thing I remember the most about Hourglass Sanatorium is just the beauty of the colors, especially the greens that showed up in that. That's when I think of that movie, the color green immediately comes to mind.
Yeah, and yet another film along these very same lines, and also a Eurocult film, if you will, is Mario Bava's Lisa and the Devil. Very similar with the colors. Obviously, it's Bava, so you've got these Bava-esque bright colors. It just almost seems to be something in the zeitgeist at the time, because all these films were made around the same time. And to see these similarities running through them is really quite interesting.
I don't want to bang the Orson Welles drum too loudly, but The Trial as well was filmed in such a way that there's this kind of ambiguous architecture all the time. And Wells filmed that by shooting bits and pieces in totally different spaces and sticking them together. And so it does become this very dreamlike world because there's no logic to the way the interiors are laid out. Some of it's shot inside the Gare d'Orsay, Paris. Other things are shot in Italy. It's all mixed together in Yugoslavia. So yeah, I don't know. There's definitely a category of films with this imaginative architecture, this dreamlike juxtaposition of totally different spaces.
And I love Cassavius. Does Orson Welles ever get out of bed in this movie? I think he's just always in bed. And the bed itself, the bedroom, I should say, feels very much like a theater to me, especially during the reading of the will and some of those scenes where you just get so many characters stuffed into one place and it just feels like Wells is on stage by being in this bed.
I suspect one of the attractions of taking this job was to be able to do the whole role from the bed. He wasn't that mobile at that point. And no, I don't say that in any derogatory way, but he was having mobility issues. So he was taking roles that enabled him to basically be fixed in his position on screen. In Treasure Island, he doesn't really do the peg legs thing at all. You mostly just see him sitting down. And I think that for the producers of the film too, they could sell the film as an Orson Welles film. But because all of his scenes take place in the exact same setting, it could be done very quickly. And I think it's 3 days plus the half day that he gave them pretty sheepishly free because he'd been such a bad boy. During the filming, he obviously had some remorse for being so unprofessional that he let them have a bit of extra time for free.
Yeah, he had just done a Claude Chabrol film, and Chabrol contacted Kumel or vice versa, and he's just, he was a nightmare. I worked with him for 9 weeks, and it was just awful. And I'm like, yeah, he could be a very bad boy quite often.
Yeah, I did read, and it's probably in the interview with Kumel on the Barrel release, that Welles was one of 3 choices for this role, and the other 2 being Henry Fonda and Peter Ustinov. I know, I feel like that's a very diverse group, and I feel like even though Welles was a lot of trouble on set, Kumel didn't like working with him, although he says apparently that in real life he was very nice, but on the set and working with him, he was a total pain in the ass. But that I just can't imagine anyone else in this role but Welles, weirdly enough. I think he just turned up, and when they finally got him to do what he was supposed to do, he did it wonderfully.
Well, when you find out that he had captured all of these gods, that he went to some island and found them and then brought them all back and enslaved them, I can see Orson Welles doing that. I could see him being a young adventurer going out and doing these things. I could probably imagine Peter Ustinov and maybe even Henry Fonda, but Welles has that gravitas, and then also where he's at with his weight and mobility and gout and drinking and eating rich foods and all of these things. I'm like, yeah, that's probably what I would be doing too. If I had the wherewithal to capture all of these gods and make them do my bidding, yeah, I'd probably relax and just lay in bed all day too. Why not?
It's very kind of Island of Dr. Moreau for me. Yeah. And I think he's in that era, like it would have, I could see him playing that role. And it's like, there are some similarities there and we'll probably get to that at some point about trying to create monsters and stuff. And you see this when you're in the taxidermist lab, you see all these like jars of things. And that's so Island of Dr. Moreau.
Oh yeah.
Also Bride of Frankenstein, that kind of the little miniature people. But in this case, they didn't work out. Yeah.
I love those little miniature people where you get to hear that squeaking. Because at first I was like, are those mice? What is going on here?
And the little arm and the mouse trap when Jan comes across it and he freaks out. It's like a baby arm, basically.
That was great. It took me a minute to even realize what was going on and why he was so horrified. And I was like, oh, it's the little people that we haven't seen. Because I literally was thinking of them like mice. Yeah, I love the sound design in this. You mentioned the editing. We'll talk more about the different versions, but I think Kumel, I want to say he edited this himself, the longer version of this, and did a freaking fantastic job. It just flows so wonderfully. We were talking about Tinto Brass recently and just how he was like, oh yeah, editing is half the movie, and I have to edit these movies in order to imbue it with my style. And I could see Kumel being exactly the same way. This feels like him from stem to stern, at least the longer version. The shorter one, not so much, but with this one, just such care taken with everything. And like we were saying before, as far as the DP being the co-director, I don't think would argue with that at all, because he was such an important figure to this movie.
So I don't know if you guys know this, sort of the why he didn't edit the version of the film that went to Cannes and was the first version of the film that was released, is basically United Artists they wanted to have their own editor. Like since it was so, again, being such a big budget film, they was an unknown entity to them. So they said, no, you did all the shooting. We're going to bring in our own guy to do the editing, which was, I think, a bit bemused and upset by. And so they brought in their own editor. And I know we'll get to talking about the differences between the two versions later. But ultimately, when Kumel was allowed to make his own edit of the film, which I think was maybe a year or two later, and United Artists saw it, the producer saw it, and they said, why we should have let you edit it. Why did you let this version out? It's nowhere near as good as the version that you cut together. And he said, I didn't want to go behind this editor's back. And so it was just all, I think United Artists were afraid to take that chance on him. And obviously it was a missed opportunity completely.
I think we get the most of the little people when it comes to the Lampernus character, if I'm saying that correctly, who we find out later on is actually Prometheus. He has stolen the light, and so he gets his liver pecked out every single morning by a bird. And the revelation of the bird was a real shocker to me the very first time I saw this. The use of the animation, I thought that was fantastic. I like that Kumel admits that Lampernus is a little much, and that he probably should have been rewritten and separated from the book a little bit more, because he is playing it to the hilt as that character. And then him being tormented by the little people voices doesn't help very much at all, because this guy is nuts. And he's played by Jean-Pierre Cassel, who, yeah, I think he's a great actor, but man, oh man, does he just go for it in this role. Hats off to him. He doesn't pull any punches. Yeah.
It's a little much.
He's a Buñuel actor too, and he's very different in the discreet show of the bourgeoisie. He knows how to do that kind of very subtle performance as well. But I guess the character is, of all the gods as we discover they are within this house, he's the one who's maybe the least individualized as something more than just Prometheus. I think the other characters have more human qualities, it seems, that Lampernus.
I love that they read Cassavius's will while he's still alive, and he gets to see the reaction from all of the people in the room, all of the people that are waiting for him to die, and gets to see how they react when they find out that they can have all of the wealth that he has amassed over the years, but they can't leave the house.
But they hear the sums of money, they get really excited, but he can never leave.
He keeps them in prison. Oh, you want my money? Okay, we'll stick around. The last two people that are alive are the ones that will get everything if they're still in the house. And eventually, Nancy, is it Nancy or is it one of the other incarnations of the actress? But I think it's Nancy and Matthias. They are like, oh, we're going to give up the money and we're going to leave. But the rest of the people don't want them to leave, nor does it feel like the house wants them to leave. Like you're saying, it does feel very much like Malpertuis is a character here, and very much a living character. It almost feels like it's breathing sometimes, especially when you hear those gas lamps and the little noise that happens when they get put out. I'm like, that's totally somebody just doing a voice, doing the sound effects for these lamps.
At this point in Welles' career, I think he had a lot of professional frustrations, and acting was something that he did by necessity because he needed to earn a living. And also he funneled a lot of that money into his own productions. And he just started making The Other Side of the Wind in 1970. And so this is very soon after he started that project. So he went to Europe for a while, made some films. The Chabrol film, I get the name actually, but he did a Chabrol film and he did this. being in that position of being an actor, being directed, brought out the worst in him. He'd been doing this for many years, being in a lot of movies, usually in Europe, sometimes some very bad movies. And when he found himself with weak-willed directors, he would completely take over as a director. So he'd be performing and directing his own scenes. But then there were other occasions when he didn't have such an easy time of taking over. Even on The Third Man, it's a legendary film, legendary performance by Welles. But he was not very cooperative in that role. I know that they were chasing him around Europe to get him to do post-synchronization. And he just generally was not happy being subordinate on a film set. And the stories Kumel tells about Welles, and he seems to have really annoyed the crew because of the demands he was making on them. They're not surprising, really. Welles was a bit like that at times. And then in totally other contexts, he would be the most charming person in the universe. And something about being an actor and being directed brought out some ugly side of Welles, especially if he didn't respect film. And I'm curious about something that I have always thought about Malpertuis is what Welles actually thought about this material, because I think we may get into this. There are some other Welles projects which echo certain aspects of Malpertuis. I think maybe The Immortal Story is something we're going to talk about, but that's a film Welles made in the late 60s, really a French television film, but it has another tall, blonde sailor as its protagonist as well, and could make an interesting double feature with Malpertuis. It's about an old man played by Orson Welles, who is manipulating the lives of this young sailor, and a woman played by Jean Moreau, and in another weird house. I'm surprised Welles didn't seemingly take more of an active interest in this film and its subject matter.
Matthew, I'll ask you this because I'm not really at all super familiar with Welles' career. I read somewhere that he, at some point, actually played the god Jupiter, which is a funny, Cassavius is not a god, obviously, but just a kind of an interesting reference.
I don't know what film that would be, but that seems like a role built for Orson Welles, because that's about his size, I think. He's called himself a king actor, not meaning that he was superior to other actors, meaning that he was the kind of actor who would be cast in those sort of roles. He would play kings and leaders, and I guess the god Jupiter would be in that category as well. It would be hard to imagine Orson Welles playing the taxidermist. Multiple reasons. He was that kind of grand actor, very tall, huge voice, all of this kind of stuff. But yeah, you can totally understand why they thought of Welles for this role. I'm actually not entirely impressed with this performance. I have some reservations about it. And I was interested to hear from you, Jessica, that you do really like his performance, because I think the makeup issue, which Kumel speaks about, is pretty indicative of Welles' approach to performance in this period. Very theatrical, and he would do his own makeup, and it often looked really bad on screen. In the Immortal Story, which is only 3 or 4 years before this, he did his own makeup for that film, and it just looks so fake. There's something very theatrical about it. When he would do films back in the United States and they would force makeup artists on it, he looks much better. But yeah, this was a tendency of his in his European period. And I think the performance is very theatrical too. And he does mumble his way through a lot of the lines. So anyway, I'm curious to hear, Jessica, your reflections on his performance.
I think he was able to embody the character in a way that was really believable for me. You would want Cassavius to be this ancient warlock who's in his sort of dying days. So it's this dying lion or something like that at his last gasps. I think he manages to embody that. I'm still this powerful person inside this sort of weak, dying body. Even though he barely moves, he's able to carry over that bombastic personality and this big, over-the-top character. And yeah, I just think for me, he handled it really well. I do love the stories about the makeup, though, with having to color correct for the greenness of the nose and how they would make him sweat under the light so they could dab some of the heavy makeup off of him when he wasn't really paying attention.
Didn't they even do some close-ups of him where there was no film in the camera?
I didn't hear that. I don't know. But I wouldn't be surprised because he was, according to Kumel and the cinematographer, just so difficult on just a really practical level. He demanded certain things. So he demanded, okay, now you're going to do my close-up. Now you're going to do the long shot. And why are you shooting above the shoulder? Why don't you change the angle of the camera? So everything had to be justified to Welles. I think in a way he's playing a game. Probably it's like a kid testing what he can get away with.
It's like Marlon Brando. He would always do that kind of shit where it's, why does the Jor-El even need to be a human? Can't he be a bagel? And it's, oh, for fuck's sakes, Marlon. And then it's, no, you are hired for this role. You're going to play it. And then once the hammer comes down, then it's, okay, yeah, all right, I'll do that. But he was always playing those kind of tricks. And yeah, it feels like Welles was kind of writing that playbook for him.
Yeah, it seems though when they would go out to lunch that week, Kumel and Welles got along wonderfully. And Kumel though was watching his watch because the time was ticking away and Welles didn't want to leave the table to go back to work that afternoon. And I can totally understand being so torn between having lunch with Orson Welles, who's probably the best conversationalist in the history of the world, but actually having to get back and keep directing your movie when you have very limited time to do this.
Oh.
So Welles, I think, didn't really care. He was quite happy to keep eating his lunch.
Yeah. Eating his lunch, drinking his wine, probably. Yeah, but can you imagine the feeling of telling Orson Welles a story or a joke and having him laugh? That laugh is just so great. I loved whenever he would laugh in an interview.
He has that great laugh. And you only get to hear it in the English dubbed version, where he asks where the priest is. And one of the three sisters says, oh, he's in the church praying for you because you refused last rites. This is one of my favorite moments of Orson Welles in the film, where you see him taking in that information and how funny it is, and then he laughs. And it's just wonderful. He's just openly the sorcerer. Of course, the church is a joke to him, and all these trappings of Christianity are a joke to him.
I wanted to address that. I did put this in October lineup because I don't know how many people would consider this a horror movie, but I definitely find a lot of horrific elements to it. And then the whole idea of these gods who have forgotten who they are, these creatures of incredible power that have been captured by Cassavius, there's just something really, they're very scary. So many of the gods are frankly very scary, and especially when you come to things like the Gorgon. And I love that Cassavius doesn't die, or he doesn't die a natural death. He has the Gorgon turn him into stone, become part of her reliquary. You get to see at one point she's got all of these statues around her, and I'm just like, oh, these are the former victims. How nice. But when these gods wake up or realize what they are and what they could do, I mean, that's a pretty frightening idea. And in the meantime, they just seem so off balance that this whole place does not feel safe at all. Jan wandering around from room to room with all these mirrors and long hallways and things. I'm just like, you are in an unsafe place, my friend. I would leave as soon as possible if you can.
Again, it's a little bit like Virgin Among the Living Dead, where Christina is repeatedly told throughout the film, you need to leave here. This isn't safe. This is dangerous. You should get out while you can.
There's a few very violent sequences. The Prometheus scene is really horrible and gory. But yeah, mostly it's the atmosphere of a horror movie more so than the periodic scenes of gore and violence that we expect in a horror movie. But yeah, and I think psychologically this is a very disturbing film, an experience for Jan. So it feels like a horror movie for me.
Yeah, I think it's a lot in the psychology of Jan that's terrifying about it, is just the fact that he's in this place that he doesn't understand. No one is communicating to him what its secrets are, like what's going on with all these people, just the general atmosphere of weirdness that pervades it. So I think it's that unknown aspect and trying to figure out where you are and orienting yourself in a strange environment that lends itself to the atmosphere of terror or fear.
There's also a comedy, and I see this as a very funny film. And I watched today back-to-back Daughters of Darkness and Malpertuis. And yeah, Daughters of Darkness, the tone of that film is much more conventionally a horror type film. I think it's a great film. But Malpertuis is that quirky, weird, funny running through it all the way. Not just the taxidermist, but a lot of the characters play these roles in a kind of comical fashion. So it's a strange mix of moods that we see in this film.
For me, this lends itself to the fact that I think this is a very Belgian film. And, I don't know how much, and how many Belgians you know or how familiar you are with Belgian culture, but it's definitely, it conveys a sort of, I think what's known as Belgitude, which is a term that was coined to explain the tension that Belgians have in their culture of being split between two colonial powers, two dominant languages spoken within the country. And there's just a self-deprecating humor that Belgians have. And I hear it when I hear Kumel being interviewed. And I feel like I see it a lot in this film. When you mentioned the comedy, I think that's totally resonant with that kind of vibe of trying to interject some humor into what could otherwise be a very serious, dark film. So I love those moments of humor. And it reminds me of how specifically Belgian this film is.
Well, I love those moments where you get that tableau of, the three women knitting, and you get to see the ceiling, which is really nice. You get to see the Gorgon. She's usually by the mirror, which is kind of cool as well. And then the taxidermist, Didelot, counting his money that he can never spend because he's going to be stuck at this house forever. But I love those shots where, again, it reminds me very much of a stage presence where you're just getting that almost establishing shot of these characters. And sometimes you cut into them and sometimes you don't. You just watch them, like the one moment where the taxidermist has that cup and ball game and he's just trying to do that. And he's just over on the side of the screen doing that for a while. Everybody else is doing their thing. And I just love those little reset moments because really the taxidermist is pretty fucking scary, because that's the one time where Jan really has to worry about his life, is that he almost gets cut open and stuffed by the taxidermist. I love when he's just, and you've got such beautiful skin to flay. I'm like, oh my God, this is awful. And I'm like, he's just eyeing him up to put sawdust or straw inside of this poor guy.
What you were saying before about the way that the images are set up, the whole film is very painterly, and I think intentionally. And I think, in fact, I'm sure that Kumel is and Jerry Fisher, because I think he said that Jerry Fisher went to a lot of Belgian museums to look at artworks, Flemish and Belgian artworks. And he's definitely making references to specific works of art in these films. Like I'm thinking of Paul Delvaux, René Magritte. I think Didelot's bowler hat is such a great Magritte reference. James Ensor with The Mask. So again, this kind of goes back to the whole Belgianness of it, is like it's the art and literature is very ingrained in their culture. So it's just part of growing up in Belgium, as these things are embedded in your psyche. So it doesn't surprise me at all that you see these specific references to artworks throughout the film. And there's even a point where one of the sequences where Jan is going through the house and opening various doors to rooms, and he opens one and it's just like a painting. It's obviously there's a sort of almost like a cinematic reference to matte painting in cinema, but also it's again like surrealist art, like Matisse, so almost like a sky or something like that. So you don't expect to open a door and find a sky that doesn't just, not a window, just it's there. And again, it's very artificial as well. Like it's not like a realistic painting of a sky. It's definitely like invoking surrealist art.
And did anybody think of Raoul Ruiz looking at this? I don't know how familiar you are with that filmmaker, but another kind of Baroque, surrealist, and in films like Three Clouds of a Sailor.
Yeah, I did think of that film, actually. I'm glad you mentioned that, because there are some similarities there for sure with that film.
I can't say I'm that familiar with his work, unfortunately. It sounds like I need to be.
He made more than 100 films, so you got a big job ahead of you, Mike. But
take your choice. Yeah.
Filling that kind of Baroque mise en scène, the way that this film is, Malpertuis, every shot is filled with so many things, and often things in the foreground, things in the background. That's the kind of approach Raoul Ruiz takes, and sometimes to extreme, almost comical lengths, where he'll have extreme foreground objects, and then with split diopters, he'll have things in the very, very distance. But in terms of the storytelling too, there's a lot of commonality. That kind of labyrinthine stories within stories, as you mentioned, the Saragossa manuscript or the 1001 Nights, the love of storytelling and the way that places sometimes are the portals into stories and into different times. So it's very much part of Ruiz's filmmaking as well.
I love how this movie ends. We talked about Virgin Among the Living Dead. There is that type of element with all of the gods coming out, and then that poor priest trying to hold up his cross, and the one character breathes fire to melt the cross, which is pretty great. I can't remember if that's Hephaestus. I guess it would make sense. He's got the power over fire.
Exactly.
Yeah, but then how the movie kind of peels itself back. We talked about the layers of, on coming to town and seeing Nancy, and then he goes into the brothel, and then it gets over the head, and then he goes to Cassavius' house, and at one point during the movie, towards the end, he wakes up, and now he's back at the brothel, and then he starts to run through the city again like he was chasing Nancy. And then you get to see, oh, here's a sign and it has this character's name. And oh, here's another sign with another character's name. He's just, oh, was this real or not? But then he actually finds the house and goes through that some more. And then eventually you find out that, no, that isn't the finale of this, that we are one layer deeper, that he's actually a patient at a mental institution and has written this all out as almost like his therapy. And yeah, I love that. We keep pulling back and back, only to find that the whole story wasn't even the story that we were being told.
And again, very Virgin Among the Living Dead wakes up and suddenly is in the hospital recovering from this psychological misadventure.
All right, we're going to take a break and play an interview with the director of Malpertuis, Harry Kumel, and we'll be back with that right after these brief messages.
Casino in Ischia is new today on digital. In the brand new action comedy starring Dominic Purcell, a fading action star heads to Italy to revive his career with a bold new movie. But when the production spirals out of control, his comeback turns into a hilarious misadventure. Buy Casino in Ischia on digital now, not rated, from Republic Pictures.
How did you even get your start when it came to filmmaking? Because you had been making films for quite a while, even before you got to your first feature.
It's very simple, and it's a story that I've told many times. My parents, my mother, had a 8 film camera. At that time, that was called 8, not Super 8, so that was split in two. In fact, 16 millimeter split in two. He filmed the family, like people did. Who had a camera a bit after the war, and that was at the time quite expensive, as you know. He filmed, and those films I already went a lot to the cinema, even at a very young age, using my pocket money that my parents gave me every week to go to the cinema. So those films looked not at all like films in the cinema. They were all dreadfully filmed, but he was amateur. And so I told him, 7, 8 or something, it doesn't look like anything. If you can do it better, here is the camera, and you film yourself, and you show me what you can. It must have been 10, I cannot exactly say it. So I made a film, filmed in the street, did tricks, the tramways disappear, that kind of thing, things that I read about. And then my father saw the result and said, the immortal words, but where is your mother and where is your sister? That's something who didn't interest me at all as subjects long. So that was the beginning. With comrades at school, one of them, who was quite wealthy, had very expensive 8 camera called Bolex Bayard, which still existing in 60 millimeter. and it was the best camera in the market. It was very, very, very expensive. About 10 of my school cameras, I must have been 12 or 13. We made a feature film together, not a long feature film, but a detective story with false new stars, because we were very limited self, and using our own apartments and that kind of thing. And people saw that and thought, well, it looks like a film. So then at 14, I read an advertisement that amateur filmers were showing their film in Antwerp in a real cinema. And I went to see that, and that was a revelation for me, because they were able to show films, that was already 60 millimeter, with sound, which at that time was something extraordinary, because having sound on film at that time for amateur was an extremely complicated thing. You actually struggled with about the details, otherwise so I saw that. I had a big shock, and at that time I already went 2-3 times in the week to the cinema, to the films that were children allowed, and I also was sent by my parents to English summer school since the age of 12, and in Britain, films that were not allowed for children in Belgium and were not Danish films, a film like Hitchcock, you could go see when you were accompanied by an adult. So there I saw my first Hitchcock when I was 12. And that was Violent in 3D. That this was extraordinary. But I had already seen on television a few Hitchcock films whom I thought were extraordinary. But I had also seen films by von Sternberg, among others. My father had immediately bought a very big television, The Story of Anna Dahan, by von Sternberg, a great masterpiece, which also impressed me very much. I also saw a Buñuel on television, which impressed me also very much. You must not forget, I was a teenager of 13, 14, 15. I said, I want to make films that look like that. And I went to the amateur film club who had shown these films in the cinema, which I admired so much, because you saw a kettle boiling and you heard the sound of the kettle and that kind of thing. So I had music, of course, and wonderful editing, because there were no film schools at that time here. Only amateurs made film. So I went there, and they saw this little guy of 14 arriving and saying, I want to be a member of your club. So, well, I became a member of the club and made, with my sister, my first feature film, a real, half destroying the house of my parents, and that was to go with the matchsticks, Anderson story. I destroyed the pillows to make snow and that kind of thing, but whatever that was. And some of the people of that amateur club helped me to put titles on it, and sound, which was music by Bach, the aria of Bach, very sad music. And it was full of tricks, film tricks, that I liked very much, double image kind of thing. And I showed this film in the amateur club, and it was what they call an overnight success. These people could not believe that a young guy of 14 years had made a film that made them cry. So I thought I can do things that others cannot do. I had my studies to go on. I go to the army, whatever, for a young man does when I studied. But at the same time, my only dream was to go to make film. My father tried to let me do his business, but that was not exactly it. And I wanted to. So I started to help people who were, television was starting at that time. I'm talking now of 56, 57, and still in the amateur club. And in the amateur club, we were a group that all these amateurs found not belonging to amateurs. They said, you make films like they make in the cinema. That does not interest us. So we became a separate group, which was in Flanders quite famous at the time, called Film Group 58, the time that it was made. And we started to make much more important. And at the same time, we started to do little items for television about cinema. And I was helping there and everything. And at television, I was then 20, 21, still studying, just out of the army as a lieutenant. And the people at the television, there was a show at television showing new fragments, excerpts of new films in the week. And they asked me to come, because I've done items for that show, to come and direct that show. So I was able, thanks to that, to see a lot of films in the week because I shoot the excerpt. And at the age of 21, they said, we have here a wunderkind, a wonder child. And the first big co-production between Holland and Flanders, my home country, was a big documentary about Erasmus, the philosopher. And they said to me, do you want to make this documentary? I remember that from my school years, my studies were different, something. And in 1 month, less than 1 month, I read everything I could about Erasmus. I said, okay, I'll do it. And we went with a crew of 4 people throughout the whole of Europe, because that group had traveled in its time everywhere. Venice, Cambridge, whatever you can imagine in Europe. And we filmed the documentary using natural occasions with a commentary spoken by actors. This, and I insisted for one thing, because at that time, everything on television, on film, was filmed on 16 millimeter. I said, in black and white. I said, oh no, I only want to make 35 millimeters. Oh, big to do and everything. But I said, if I don't have 35 millimeter, I'm not doing it. So they accepted, and you must always remember that at that time, film was extremely expensive as a material to buy. So that was not a silly thing. I went on to make that documentary, and it went on to have a big television prize at that time called the Italia Prize. It's so big to do everything. And so I went on making a lot of prestigious documentaries, a little bit like Ken Russell in England, but naturally not in that amount, but that kind of thing. Big production. And also they started to give me, and that was my first thing with actors on television because I'd already started to direct actors on the stage. I had been in between, I had been an assistant to very famous stage director and everything. So I began to know something about actor directing. And they started to give me my first real feature, also on 35 millimeters. It was The Gravedigger by Franz Kafka, the only play that he ever wrote. I recently saw it again, and for somebody of 20, I must have been 25. It was not bad, looking back. So they said to me, at that time, it looked different than what the people were saying. That was the whole point. And it was, I had always been a very good technician. Please don't think at this as a boast. To be a good technician is nothing. That is simply something one can learn as one does. This is nothing to be a good technician. Unfortunately, the cinema is made of very bad technicians nowadays. And discussed. But if a ballet dancer would be dancing like some filmmakers are making film, they wouldn't have enough tomatoes and rotten eggs to throw to the stage. This is the terrible. This was it. So I went on. There were, at that time, the first subsidies in Belgium were being developed by the Ministry of Culture. And, of course, they came to me and said, you're making films for television, documentaries, etc., teleplays, whatever. Are you interested to do a first movie? Of course, I said, I'm interested to do a first movie. And first I chose something which they didn't want because it wasn't finished enough. It was based on a novel by Henry James, and Henry James is not especially a Flemish writer. And so I had adapted it to Belgium, but that was not enough. I need to do them. But they counseled me to use a Flemish writer, and I made my first feature, which was called The Shires. This film was not very well received in Belgium, but when it was shown in Britain, all of a sudden it was chosen as one of the 10 best films of that year. Slowly, I started to build up my career.
Were you aware of the novel Malpertuis before you started the project?
My first film, The Shires, it's when you see it again, it's a very, very deep movie. If I reflect it has been restored now. Everybody in Flanders says it's the best Flemish film ever made and that kind of idiocy. But don't forget, it's a very small country and people don't understand in your own country what you are doing. Now, internationally, at that time already, I must say that remember and go a little bit back, I was still making shows for the new films in the week that I told you about with excerpts of films. And for that, I was sent to various film festivals where I met a lot of film directors with whom I started to talk. And they saw this young man that's, always the same thing. Oh, this very young man, he knows, I got acquainted with very famous directors who were very nice and who saw that first film and liked it and made enormous compliments. And so you see, this, I have to tell you that I went to a lot of films. I think 3 per year for as long as 10 years. So, while I'm doing that. So, first film, everybody, it returns to Belgium. being one of the best films. All the critics forget what they have ever written and start to bury me under roses and whatever you want. And and somebody at television, a producer, a lady producer, told me there is one subject that is completely made for you, and that is the novel Malpertuis by Shires. And I read the novel, I said, my goodness, it is almost impossible to do, but being, and that's at 26, I must have been about 30. No, but before that, 29. I was 39. I said, oh, but because it's difficult, and because I had made the first film, which was not the easiest subject to do, I said, well, when you are 29, you say to yourself, I can't do anything. So I said, oh, well, I'll try. But having made that very first film that was such a success, certainly not immediately with the public here in France, but internationally, and also with young producers and filmmakers here in Belgium who lauded me and said, you are the best, and all that kind of thing. And they came to me and they said, we are young producers and we have directed and produced erotic movies, well, what you call genre film. Are you prepared to do one of these films for us in your style? I said, if it is in my style, the style of that person, it will never be commercial, I can assure you. Oh, no, we believe in you, make it. So I was confronted with the idea. That was while I was preparing Malpertuis. So, no problem, I said, okay. But at the same time, I was getting in my head, whom can I talk to? I don't like to write my movies myself. I'm like an opera composer. I lead the libretto, and I know the opera composers who did their own librettos, like Richard Wagner, are dreadful dramatists, and because they need 4 hours to do something you can do in 20 minutes. So, not taking away his greatness, but that he could. He was not very capable. And that was the reason why I didn't want to write myself, one of the reasons. And Hitchcock never wrote directly himself, but it's much better to work with somebody. So, because I traveled a lot for television, through documentaries, etc., I came into contact with very important intellectual people in France. And everybody I asked, do you perhaps know somebody in France who knows about cinema and who would be capable to do that, not to adapt that novel? And everybody went through that novel. That's a difficult one from them. But one of the very great publishers of France told me, I know of somebody, the great publisher that Jean-Jacques Prouvaire, who had published Lolita, that kind of thing, that's a truly important person. And he said, I know him, and he's called Jean Ferry. Unfortunately, because of the Nouvelle Vague, he has no longer much work to do. He had written at that time 65 films, can you imagine, among which one of the greatest French films ever made, Le Quai des Orfèvres by Clouseau. But not only that, he had written the treatment of Children of Paradise. Can you imagine a person of that quality who didn't have any work in because of the Nouvelle Vague? these idiots of the Nouvelle Vague believed that they could write, which they couldn't. They couldn't film and they couldn't write. Two things at the same moment. The biggest one being François Truffaut, his horribly bad director. And I don't even mention Jean-Philippe Godard, otherwise I go from it. And these people were terrible, except with a few exceptions. Rinal, of course, Alain René, a great filmmaker, but and Bresson, but they were not Nouvelle Vague, they were great filmmakers. And they were truly, they were fantastic people. And of course, Claude Chabrol became a very good friend. They were very good, but the rest was trash. So this poor man, together with the other great writers, Orange Ebust, who had written for Claude Panlara, were the best of the best in France. And I can assure you that screenwriters, when they were the best of the best, like Jean Cocteau or whatever, they were very, very, very good. And they presented me to that man. He reads the book. He says it's a bit difficult, which is a human, and said, but they'll do the half. I'll think about it. Meanwhile, now I go back to these young producers who had said, made for us an erotic, violent genre of film for us. I said, oh my goodness, to do that. So, and I didn't even know what kind of subject. So I went, as they had asked me, I went for a walk to saw a magazine called Historia, a magazine about history, and with the title, The Bloody Countess, La Comtesse Sanglante, account about the Countess Bathory. I read about it, I said, this is the subject for me. 600 virgins, to bathe in the blood of 600 virgins to stay young. This one. I go immediately back to this young producer who say, you're completely mad. This is low budget cinema. Costumes, it's 17th century, 600 virgins. No. And that was before digital cinema, of course, where you could have multiplied the virgins. And I said, oh, but that's not a problem. Since she bathes in the blood of virgins to stay young, maybe she's still young, and she's still roaming the world looking for virgins. It gets more difficult every day, and that's it. And with the young producer who had asked me that, and it was very courageous, I must say, to ask that, we wrote a treatment of 60 pages, which I still have, on the corner of a table during 3 days and 3 nights, all of them in one piece. And that was the film that would become Daughters of Dark. And I said, my goodness, what have I written now? This is a dreadful subject with erotic scenes. I cannot show this to my parents, who wouldn't have cared less, but you know. And I said, this is impossible. I've just made a film that has been applauded by a great director like Peter Brook in England. That was my first. When we saw that the BFI and thought it was whatever. You know, to be applauded by Peter Brook at that time, I don't know if you can imagine what that was. That was a great director. That was the Harold Prince and more of his time. Oh, I thought, I've got a solution. I can't insult these good young producers. I'll send that treatment to Jean Ferry, his great writer who had written Les Enfants du Paradis. Well, the treatment, and Le Quai des Orfèvres, Manon, all the films of Clouseau, Christian Jacques, name a great French filmmaker he had worked for. And he will certainly reject this as the worst crush he ever had. And then I have a defense to do something else. I sent it to him. At that time, we used telegram and courier, to communicate. And I get back a telegram. This story is the great liberation. I want to write the dialogue and readapt the screenplay and adapt the screenplay from this script. My plan fell into the water, so I was bound by this. I put in a second obstacle in this. I said, if we do that film, I want the greatest intellectual actress of France at that time, the great Delphine Seyrig. She had just made l'année dernière à Magne, because she's a great actress. I've seen her on the stage and everything. That's fabulous. And I said, I want to have this, because she will refuse, of course. I don't do that kind of stuff. This was not knowing either her lover at that time, Alain René, who loved comic strip, and not knowing her sense of humor and intelligence. And she said, oh, this little one, such completely different from what Alain lets me do and everything. We will have a lot of fun. I want to do it. So my second plan fell into the water. So I was bound by that. Now, to go back to Malpertuis, that has been a little bit postponed, but he was working on it. So once Thoughts of Darkness was finished, of course, again in Belgium, they didn't understand the first word about the film made by Belgians looking like that. It didn't look quite amateurish, but it was, again, an overnight, that's not exaggerated, an overnight success in the United States, because they had financed the part of the film, very little money, that's true. And it came to Paris, where also it was an overnight success. I couldn't believe it. I thought the film was complete crap. But Thoughts of Darkness made a huge amount of money. Well, look, it's still, now it's shown all over the world. People, young people, I still can't understand it, but that's the truth. So they said, you can do whatever you want. I said, I'm busy with Malpertuis, what you want to do that. Malpertuis being what the French call a film fantastique. And Jean-Philippe, they all thought, oh, he's going to make us a second Thoughts of Darkness with the same kind of success. We'll have even more famous actors. We'll do everything. We take the best cameraman there is. But Jerry Fisher at that time, very, very good. Jerry reads the screenplay was written at that time, says, oh, I want to do it, this pictorial wonder. At last I can do something where I can show really what I can do, etc., etc. I had also the possibility of name a great director of photography of that time in Britain, Ossie Morris, whoever. They all wanted to make. They were, of course, it's a dream for the cinematograph. I had Jerry, I had great actors and everything. And I started to do the film. And there are a few things began to go wrong. Because when they saw the Russians, they didn't see the film they were expecting, of course. It was a completely different movie than Thoughts of Dark. And they started to interfere, etc. They sent me, and the United Artists was involved. So they sent me an editor. I edit my films at the same time that I film them. This is called Richard Martin. He's probably dead by now, but should have been dead by then. It was not the fault of this man. He has done a lot of films. He destroyed, for instance, Sleuth, the film by Mankiewicz. That is one of his. If you see that film again, and if you want to see a film that Midnight Cowboy he also did, for which he had an Oscar, which is an uncredited. There you know that Oscars don't mean anything. This is a dreadfully edited film. So, but on top of that, he couldn't understand it, but was completely beyond his capabilities, not only technical capabilities, intellectual capabilities. This was not the film where somebody comes into a door and opens the door. People enter doors in a different way in that film. It was, well, he didn't understand. After 1 week, I said, get me rid of that director and my producer, who were not the producers of Darkness. They were bigger producers. I said, oh, no. This man has been sent to us by United Artists. We can't do that. They will think something is off. I said, but he's just an editor. Come on, get with it. I'm a good editor, I know. No. Okay. We stayed with that man. It was awful what this man did. He couldn't really understand. And the film went on in this verse to Cannes, of course, flopped, not only because of that, for the reason that at that time, genres in Cannes were unheard of, with your colleagues, journalists, said, do you really think this genre belongs to a festival like Cannes? That were a question. Kind of. It's on film. It's this immortal question has been registered and will enter history. Can you imagine how he just said that? But one thing they were right, the film was no good because it was completely wrong. But I had one saving grace. This film was, for good part, subsidized by the Flemish Ministry of Culture. And I was obliged, or my producer obliged, to do a Flemish version of the film. So I said to the Belgian producer, let me do the Flemish version, but re-edited completely. But that was not just a re-edition. That if it had been simply take the negative and start all over again, wouldn't have been a dip. No, I had to swim between second takes, and this film will never be what it could have been, because even what I did was not what it could have been if it had been well edited from the first. That is the whole story of that film. Fortunately, my films have a tendency to survive the times, and with the years, the film has grown reputation, and now it has not the cult status of Daughters of Darkness, which is something exceptional, but I don't speak about the quality of the film, I speak about the cult status. And it is, it has now its kind of reputation. This reputation will now be hundredfold because the European Union and very much etc. had chosen it as one of the 10 films that they subsidized to be completely restored. It was not an easy task because the negative had suffered quite a lot, but we managed. I supervised the Spielberg supervised the latest restoration of Daughters of Darkness, which is far better than the original. And it is all right. And it will be shown in Bologna, the old film, the restored films, etc. And then probably, and I begin to feel it, they all begin to say, this very special film that nobody's ever made, something like that. They begin to make the noises that I know they usually make with my film. And I would prefer they recognize them immediately, but that is unfortunately not the case. That's the story of Malpertuis.
Just to clarify, why were you not able to go back to the original footage when you were doing your cut of it?
Because once a film is made, the negative is cut. It is not a digital movie, it's not a problem. But with the analog film, the whole negative is cut. So you have to do everything in between. You have second takes, of course. And you never, in a big film, you never shoot one shot. You one take of one shot. You shoot 2 or 3, and to be sure on different cassettes. That's something probably for something out of prehistory, but we used it so that it would not land up in the lab. If something went wrong in the lab, you still had a second take, etc. So it's a film made out of second takes, and in between takes, in between the takes, there are also pieces and bits and pieces. So here, now and then, I had to make a dupe of the original editing because I needed the shot as it was, or a piece of that shot, but mostly it was second choice. Second choice. So, you see, that is the reason. If you know what analog film is, then you will understand it immediately. It is simply that you just the film that has been edited. You cannot unedit it. That is very simple. It is a unique material on the contrary for your young people. The digital, you have everything in all the quantities that you want without any problem. You can use the original constantly. Whereas with analog film, you have only that one piece of negative. Like you make, anybody who wants to make, nobody anymore makes analog photography. But if you use analog film, which film and film, you only have that one piece, so you have to navigate between the things. So that's the reason. It's a very simple reason. If you understand what the cinema used to be, of course, then it's a cinema.
I forget about the negative cutting part of things and how you just don't have the backups of those, anything else. That's, like you said, it once it's cut.
Once it's cut, but you can do dupes, but then the quality suffers. You can dupe a negative, of course, and that works with an inter negative, but in color, certainly the quality suffers terribly, so that you're trying to avoid. So you use second choice. When you filmed a film on film, you took a shot, you took a second shot for cover, so that, and sometimes things went wrong, and you got a third. Sometimes there were directors who did 18 takes of the same shot, and I'm not that kind of director. My shots are well prepared, so I need only one shot, but I cover one, and sometimes something went wrong, so you had a reserve. And we had to retrieve all these bits and pieces. It was a puzzle. You cannot imagine how complex and complicated it was. Which it could not be cut like you cut a film normally. I must say the result I achieved within those difficulties, I'm very proud of technically, because it still, with all its faults, holds together. But it would have held far better together if I had had it from the first time. Little anecdote, the people of United Artists who saw then the first version and then the second version, the one I edited, they came to me and they said, "But why didn't you call us and say, get rid of that editor?" And I said, "Yeah, I can't. That's not my character. I cannot, behind the back of my producer, begin to call financiers or whatever. That you don't. That's morally reprehensible, and you don't do that." I would have done it now, because I know that this kind of, but at that time I was very young, don't forget, and with an extremely complicated film to make with 3 characters. It was a complicated film to make. A film itself, you don't have in Belgium the very best, usually the best assistants in the world, and that kind of thing. Unfortunately, I had a wonderful director of photography on with everything. He had a very good creator of it. Also, I had a few people, and I had very, very good British technicians for all the special effects. So these people helped me during the shooting. They were otherwise come cuckoo with this kind of thing, because it remained a Belgian production with a very, it's not like films that we make today, where the cinema is a commercial, costs more than films that we made in these times. Yeah, and speaking of a very, 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 very long time ago, half a century, don't forget. That is the reason why it is like it is. I don't understand me wrongly. I'm proud of what I did then with the material I had. I think certainly during the last third, it holds very well together, and the young people who see it seem to be impressed, because it's different from what is usually seen in that genre, and it has its reputation, and I won't cry over that fact. But it could have been 1,000 times better. I had one of the greatest musicians of all time in cinema, Georges Delerue, who told me, and I said, the French, don't pay a French composer. He works on auto rights. The times that film is done. I told him, "Georges, you have not earned a lot of money with that." No. And he said to me, "Listen, Harry, this is the best film I ever made a score for. But this is the best score I ever made for the best score I ever made for a film. I would have redone it and not asked one sou for it." All these people who worked for it, Jerry also, and the actors, I showed that an actress like Stephen Hampton could do far more than what she did usually for television and in the British industry and all these things. I'm not discontent, but you should know it is not the film. I sometimes imagine what it could have been. I cannot, because one cannot know. That is something, it is impossible to know. You cannot know it. You cannot even imagine it. And I certainly cannot, because of it's something which went wrong in organization and should not have gone wrong. But I don't complain. I have a film that remains, that holds up after so many years. It's not the immense success that Daughters of Darkness has, but still holds well. So why should I be? There are not many directors who can say that. So why should I be unhappy?
You mentioned Jerry Fisher. What was it like working with him?
Oh, fantastic. Great technician. 20 minutes per shot. With total speed, imagination. He was one of those DOPs that goes to the museums, looks at the light, knows what light is, knows what drama is, understands the film. The only problem I had, he knew I was a very good technician, and I knew he was a great director of photography. So, from time to time, the shots, you see that in the shots, the kind of, it's not very important, but it was always, I'm going to invent for you something which is so difficult, nobody can ever resolve it, and he resolved it immediately, of course. Whereas on this side, he said, will he be able to do that? And the film suffers a little bit of that, a little bit. He had worked with terrible directors whom he despised. I would not have liked to be despised by Jerry Fisher, who had this British arrogance and irony which kills people with words, you know. This is perfidy. The British perfidy is incredible. When they don't like people, it's like you better jump into your grave immediately. But we had great respect for each other. He was one wonderful technician, not only technician, wonderful artist. But it was no surprise. It was all the time, free time in museums, which is the way to learn how to do light. Because photography is light, nothing else. And he knew, he understood the shot. And the only thing that was different for Daughters of Darkness, I had a Dutch director of photography called Eddie van der Ende, who was one of the very, very best women's photographers I ever had, probably the best. Women looked fabulous, and in Daughters of Darkness, you can see what I did. And they looked so fabulous that when we were restoring the film in Rome, now, 2 years ago, the young Italians that worked in the lab, the restoration, guys of 20, came into the room where we were doing the restoration and said how beautiful, in Italian, how beautiful these women are. In a film of 50 years old, you see, because they look fabulous. Now, this director of photography, being Dutch, was very good in soft and faces, and not very adequate, but not brilliant when it comes to atmosphere. Whereas Jerry was only interested in atmosphere. And women's faces, he said to me, it's always the same thing. You put that light at 60 degrees, you do a key light, you do an eye light. And that's true. It is always the same thing, but it is not always the same thing. And that's the problem of our business. It is the same thing, but if you have got talent, it is not the same thing. You use the elements of the technique, of course, but what you add, without even sometimes knowing what you add, is that what makes the difference between a horror made by François Truffaut and a film made by Alain Resnais, two French filmmakers, one an idiot and the other a great artist. So you had that one, great admiration for that man up to the end of his life. When he saw the film again in the BFI, he came out and said in his very visual fashion, "Oh well, we didn't do too badly there. He was, that's the way he was. British are like that, and it's extremely agreeable to work with British technicians and the artists, the actors as well as the technicians. They are so professional. They have so little arrogance. And they have this mentality which very, very few countries exist. They, from the chauffeur on up to the director, they always say our, so if you understand what I mean. And they, in Belgium, for instance, when I say you have to do that or it, I very demanding director, they said, of course you work so hard. It's your film. That's the Belgian mentality. And often also the American mentality. Oh, but look, it's not it's the work that we go from one thing to the other. Never a British technician has that mentality. They always are proud of their work and proud of the work they are working on. And that is a pleasure. I don't know if it's still like that, but I think so. It's in their mentality. And that the British will always be invincible because they have this strength of character and of knowledge. And you get, it has its drawbacks, this Britishness. You can see that in some of their better films that are not so good. And in the bad parts of one of their greatest directors, David Lean, but in the lesser parts, say, compare Nine's Daughter to Lawrence of Arabia. Lawrence of Arabia being an absolute masterpiece, of course. This perfection and this search for perfection can sometimes make them blind for deficiencies in the setup of the whole dramatics. This is the problem because they are not obsessed by techniques like the Germans. In the odd way of the Germans, you go gaga, because they don't want that everything must be within the whole. That's terrible. You have really to use the whip there to get something done, and that is outside their capabilities. But the British are one. But I'm not the only director who said that. But all people who have worked with the British say the same thing. So it's nothing special.
Can you tell me a bit about your cast? It's such a great collection of different actors.
Let's start with Orson Welles. That was just a call. The man had not a lot to do. He said, I cost so much per day, and I had it. So nothing special. He liked the parts because actors like parts where they die. Actors love to play dying scenes. So Casey dies the whole moment he's on the stage, on the land. He was a dreadful man, I must say. No respect for his fellow actors. That was the worst part. But he was at the end of his... He completely didn't understand cinema anymore. It was very tragic working with him. And in fact, he had always been a great producer, putting people together was his great forte. But I have my doubts about other things. But he couldn't have that. I had two, and to give you an example, I had three possibilities: Orson Welles, John Huston, or Peter Ustinov to play that part. That will be called Orson and the first. Then this was an international co-production, so we had to pick up people from various countries. My first choice for the acting part that Susan did very well was Catherine Deneuve, through an idiocy. Because Catherine, I don't speak about the quality of actors. I speak about the aspect. Catherine has something extraordinary. She has a blank face. She has a blank face. That face you could fill up with everything. She was not the greatest intelligent actress. It was not Delphine Sherry or whatever, not Simon Signoret or that guy. No. But her face, you could do anything with it. And that was ideal for playing those, in fact, 5 parts, but 3 parts. Then, unfortunately, the idiotic producers I had at that time had arranged for her to see Dogs of Darkness in the cinema. No problem. But without telling me, you have to come to that cinema at that time, this in the cinema. Unfortunately, they asked that, and Catherine had just come from a shoot somewhere and was not made up. And she's the kind of actress who needs to have her mask on, you see. And she comes out and presented to her as the director. And the matter was over. She didn't want to do the film, you understand, because she had been trapped. And me too. And that was so. Somebody said, "Oh, I know Pierre Carni de Fer, French director, we was married at that time. What would you think of Susan Hanser?" I said, which is not exactly like that should be for the past, but she's a very good actor. And they said to me, "Oh, we have the greatest of the time makeup man of Britain, who used to be the makeup man of Ingrid Bergman, Ava Gardner, etc. And he will manage, and which he did extraordinarily well." So I had John O'Gorman and Susan Hampshire. So that was second, and I wanted to work because I knew him through Claude Chabrol with Michel Bouquet, greatest French actor at that time, and still is in my eyes. He's no longer with us. And Michel was perfect for the part. On the other hand, I said, "Oh, I'd love to work with Jean-Pierre Cassel. You know, I need French actor. I'd love to work with Jean-Pierre Cassel." And since he always plays comedies, I'll do a counter effect with him and do something completely different. This had to do with my screenwriter who loved that character he plays, and which comes directly out of the novel as such, and that was the biggest error I could have made, not Jean-Pierre Cassel. But as you know, and I've seen the film, all these characters are simple burghers, and inside they are gods. Okay? And instead of making a strange character out of Jean-Pierre, I should have made him the concierge of that huge house who worries about his lights going out. You see, that was the immense error of my life, and which I will reproach to myself, because the young guy who read the screenplay had already told me before, and that is wrong. And you never believe somebody who says that, or you have great difficulty to believe something on which you have worked a long time, which was this case with the script. All the other actors, Sylvie Vartan, I wanted to use because I had wanted her, in fact, to play the young girl in Daughters of Darkness. So since that she would have been far better also than that Canadian woman, and the rest, yes, again, all famous Flemish actors, which we don't know, of course, and that one of them being a comedian who played Malpertuis, and he was fabulous. All these people, the Flemish people were wonderful. Reason the more that the attitude of Mr. Welles towards them was reprehensible. He even destroyed the scene with Michel Bouquet. This big scene, and it was a comedy scene, and in the middle of the scene, Orson started to laugh. He had said to me before, do you use a close-up in that scene? I said, no, Orson, it is a comedy scene. We do medium shot and we stay on the scene like it is. And Orson did not like that. And in the middle of the scene, which was quite a comical scene, Michel had rehearsed very, very well. And Orson started to laugh. So we redo the scene, and he always started to laugh at the same moment. So we had Jerry behind me on the camera said, give the bastard his close-up, otherwise we'll still be here tomorrow. This gives you an idea of whom Orson Welles was. Very dreadful person. But it happens. And if he wouldn't have been there, it wouldn't have been the same film. People suffered more than I ever suffered with Marilyn Monroe. So this is nothing but films, this kind of thing. That's it. What else do you want?
I'm very curious about the retitling for, I imagine it's just for the United States, The Legend of Doom House. Was it really released under that title?
I think that was the subtitle of one of the pocket editions of the novel. It's written in French, in France. L'histoire de la maison hantée. It's ghost, it's like haunted, it's haunted house. That must be the reason. Nothing special.
Ultimately, how was the movie received? You mentioned it playing at Cannes. You mentioned your Flemish edit of it. How did they play for audiences?
In Cannes, it was a catastrophe because, on the one hand, the critics could not understand how could this kind of film be shown in Cannes? That would never be the case in our time, of course, but that was the the case in that time, it was not well received. Not at all. When I had redone the film, there was, of course, re-evaluation, but still it never reached the heights that Daughters of Darkness had, which I understand. I still believe that if I had edited it from the first time, it would have probably perhaps not had that kind of success, such huge screenings and so on. But with the years, now it has, when you look on nowadays, the barometer for such things is internet, of course. It has its own reputation. I think because it is such a bizarre film, more than all the rest. And that's it. Oh, yes, there's one actor, of course, the main actor, Matthew Carriere. Also, it does his job very well. I think I made an error in this sense. In my mind, because it took a long time before we made that film, 3 years, don't forget. I had seen him in a wonderful film called The Youth, Der Junge Turles by Volker Schlöndorff, where he was very young. And in my mind, he had stayed that boy, and I think he's a little too old for the part. But for the rest, but these are small things that in every film has problems. In Maestro, this new film, the woman Mulligan is an horror, but she can't help it. She's a very good actress, but I think she's wrong for the part. Or films, things happen, and who can explain that both DiCaprio and Robert De Niro, who are such superb actors, are so awful in that Moon movie by Scorsese. Nobody understands it. How can a DiCaprio be so bad? I mean, that's the problem. And it's not because Scorsese is my age. He's still the very great director he is. It's simply, it happens. It happens. With films, things happen that are incomprehensible. And that's the life. Because if we knew, we would be living all in huge castles with hundreds of retainers and that kind of thing. Nobody knows that. Goldman, who said that very well, nobody knows anything. This is still the great truth about cinema. One does not understand. I cannot understand. For that, in general, that film is a very bad movie. The thing of the moon there with this Indian thing. But apart from that, you cannot understand how such great actors can be so terrible. And it happens. It happens. And it is not a question of approach. It's not a question of choice. One cannot understand. I have no rational explanation for strange things that happen in the cinema. One can find here a reason, like I explained to you, that's why I told you that about Matthew Carriere being a little bit too old, or Catherine Deneuve would have probably been more interesting, not better, but more, certainly not as an actor, but more interesting visually than Susan. That kind of thing one can explain. I can explain why in Daughter of Darkness, the Canadian actress is so awful, because she was incapable of acting, whatever I did. But I edited that movie, and therefore I could arrange things. And why the male John Carlin was also too old. He had been presented to me on photo as being 20 years younger than he was really. So that were the American people who wanted him, because he had played the film The House of Dark Shadows. And they said, if he has played that, he could play that. But you know how producers were. So he was far too. This is a very amusing anecdote, is that I wanted that, like I told you, Sylvie Vartan for that part that a Canadian idiot did. But I had thought of Malcolm McDowell. I don't know if the name tells you something, an English actor, for the part of an English aristocrat. He read the script and threw it literally at my head and said, I won't do such pornography. Okay, it happened. 6 months later, he did Caligula. Now, this must explain to you what actors are. And this can be translated into the very simple sentence, never believe that. That's it. And that's it. They are actors. They're actors. They can't help it. It does not diminish their capability, nor their talent, nor nothing. But if the extraordinary sentence nobody knows anything applies to somebody, that's to actors. It happens. You know, it's not. It's an art. It is not a science, and even science. No, it's not. The closest it can be is to quantum mechanics. But well, for the rest, it is absolutely incomprehensible. Why things go well and why things go wrong. That's it.
How about you? What are you working on these days, or what are you up to?
I have an idea for a French biography of a famous French songstress who was a kind of, how should I say, influencer of her time in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, called Suzy Solidor. You won't know her. Her thing was that she has been painted 240 times by the most, among them, the most famous painters, the 20s, 30s, of her time. 200, and her cabaret, she had her own cabaret in Paris, was hung full of those paintings. And that is one of her, and she was a great singer. She sang only about sailors and the sea, etc. But what she did, well, mainly she sang only about that. And the interesting part of her is she was the lesbian of all lesbians, but loved one man, and not a little love story. He was the most famous and most handsome French pilot of his time, who was killed during one of his flights, called Jean Mermoz. You won't know him, but all the French, many, it's so well known that many schools are named after him and that kind of thing. That makes it extremely interesting. She knew everybody. She was what nowadays would be called an influencer. She dressed fabulous body, all great photographers like Man Ray photographed her on all sides, the Jean Cocteau, name a great French artist, and she is involved with him. So she was a very important thing. The only thing that producers asked me, whom will we choose to play that part? And that's a big problem. But we'll find that is not. And biographies are now something that is considered as being a good commercial bet. So I hope that I will be able to make it. It is not a horribly expensive film, but of course it's a costume movie and with all things. But she's before everything and a very, very great artist and very, very, very interesting. The sexual part is interesting. The life itself is interesting. Her obsession with her art. She considered herself a great artist. That she was also somebody who did not only sing, she recited poems in her cabaret and knew everybody. And that's it's a kind of review, a biography. It's a biography with that exception that most biographies are flashbacks, and this film is chronological because I detest flashbacks, and that's it. And that's what I'm busy with.
Mr. Kumel, thank you so much for your time. This has been so great talking with you.
Well, that's very good. If you are happy with it, I'm happy too. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
All right, we are back and we are talking about Malpertuis. And like I said, the director's cut is the second version of this that I saw. I watched the theatrical version at first, and I think I need to watch probably both of them a few more times just to see more of the differences. But we've talked about how labyrinthine this story is literally at times, but the longer version definitely gives me a lot more to chew on and is much more of a satisfying watch. Like I said, the only thing that I'm missing is Orson Welles' voice, and Matthew, it doesn't sound like you even miss that.
I think he kind of is mumbles his way through the role a little bit, and so I think it was a feature of his vocal performance in those years. I don't quite know what to say about why he was doing things that way, but yeah, I don't have too much of a problem watching this film in Flemish. I think, despite the fact that most of the main characters were speaking English, well, Jan and Nancy are speaking English, as is Orson Welles, and I guess some of the other actors are speaking French. But in a way, this is like the Italian approach to making a movie, where you can cast actors from all over the world with different languages, doing scenes, it seems, in their respective languages, and then being dubbed into one consistent language at the end. So when you watch a lot of films from the same period, you get very used to this type of multilingual approach.
I've always been a fan more over the last 2 decades of the use of dubbing in European films, and just that the dubbing always, for me anyway, feels like it adds a little bit of a layer of disconnect, that you can tell that people aren't saying what they're actually saying, and that makes it even stranger for me. So watching a film that deals with the Fantastique, seeing that dubbed, I think that actually adds another aspect to it, which I really like. So watching those giallo films, watching more of the horror films and things, it's just like, oh yeah, this makes it even stranger because it feels like the voices aren't matched up perfectly with the faces.
Yeah, it's like a disassociation kind of thing that adds to the sort of uncomfortable, like uncanniness of a lot of the films of this era, especially horror and fantastique. And yes, I would understand that for a first-time watcher, and I'm sure the first time I saw like a sort of European dubbed film where actors are not, the lip movements aren't matching up. It was probably, I'm sure I was very disoriented too, but it's an acquired taste. And once you're able to get on board with that, I think you benefit from that quality that the dubbing has.
I have to recommend, I saw a really nice documentary called Forgotten Scares, which deals a lot with Belgian horror films. I think it's called Forgotten Scares, an in-depth look at Flemish horror cinema. It was from 2017. There's a lot of discussion of Kumel in there, as well as some of the other Flemish filmmakers that were his contemporaries and even some of the newer folks that have been, working over the last couple decades. I really thought that was great. It was so nice to get so specific to look at just Flemish horror. I'm like, is there enough to sustain a documentary on Flemish horror? Yes, there is. It's more than just Daughters of Darkness, Malpertuis, and then Sadists with Red Teeth. There was a lot of good films being made at this time, and I find these fascinating. I'm really curious to get into more, and I love to hear that there's actually that, what did you call it before, Jessica? The Belgian, what was
Belgitude.
It? Belgitude, yes. I'm curious to see more films that express Belgitude.
I think that while the Belgian film industry itself, and that documentary is absolutely wonderful. It's I actually came across it as an extra on, I think it was Rabid Grannies, it was a 90s Belgian horror film. And so it was really great to watch because they do talk about and to Kumel a lot at the beginning. But like I said, even though there isn't a sort of grand tradition of Belgian cinema, such as there is in France or Germany or Italy, I think the lineage that sort of leads up to films like Malpertuis, there's another sort of director in the surrealist tradition that came slightly before Kumel called André Delvaux, I believe, who worked up and starting in the 50s and I think up until the 80s rather. I think this sort of lineage of weirdness in art, like their surrealist roots, and prior to that, even the symbolist roots, because Belgian symbolism, which is a sort of precursor to Belgian surrealism in general, is that weird, uncanny, strange, horrific images and channeling historical references. So I think I see it as part of the Belgian psyche. It's just, and though there may have not been as much opportunity for the Belgian cinema to thrive in a way that it might in a larger country, I think that because they have this rich lineage that, like, once there started to be a tradition of Belgian films, albeit a bit later than other countries, that they're very dynamic. They have their own character. And that's, for me, I feel like that's where that comes from.
I would almost be curious to compare Swiss films to Belgian films, just because we talked a little bit earlier this year about The Unknown Man from Chandagore, and just that Switzerland is in that weird position like Belgium is, where it's all of these different languages, all of these different cultures all coming together in one place. I would be curious to know if there are crossovers between that, just with that kind of almost fragmented psyche that they have. And I've only been to Belgium once, but I really enjoyed it. Thought it was great. I loved Antwerp. And I love this whole idea of the two cultures living together, and just that everything had to be in multiple languages. It was a little bit more organic than when you go to Canada and they're just, oh yeah, and the French stuff. Like, until you get to Quebec, and then it's just the French is the most important thing, and fuck all the English stuff. But when you're in the English-speaking part of Canada, it's, no, we also have to have the French. There's got to be the French here. There's got to have arrête on every stop sign. But yeah, you don't see that necessarily, especially in Montreal. It's just, I don't want to speak English. Get out of here. I really now am pretty inspired to see more of these Belgian films. And do you know, did Kumel make other things that are worth tracking down and checking out?
Obviously, it's Daughters of Darkness.
Right.
And you have as well. There's a movie that predates both of them that he made, I think, just a few years before. It was this debut feature called, I believe it's Monsieur Hawaden or something like that. I've tried to find it. It doesn't seem like it's readily available. I've Google searched it. I've seen if there have been any like home video releases. I can't find it. And I would like to see it because it does seem to, from what I understand, it lines up with Daughters of Darkness and Malpertuis in a fantastique kind of way. But my understanding is that after Malpertuis, Kumel was so disillusioned with the film industry that he just decided he was going to work in television and do documentaries. And so I think like the bulk of his work following Malpertuis is in that vein, rather than, I think he just decided like this, he liked doing those films, but also they weren't really working for him in terms of his career. And so he just decided to move on from it. He did the other thing that I have seen that he's done was there was a TV show in the 80s and 90s from France called La Série Rose. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but it was like an erotic late night TV. And it was done like taking erotic stories from classic literature and adapting them for TV. And Kumel did a few of those, I think, as did Valerian Borovchik, the younger Buñuel. So it's quite weird, but it's like sexy late night TV, but it's also like classic literature and very well-respected directors working on these. So it's been a while since I'd seen Kumel's contribution to that series, but now I have to revisit it, just now having deep dived into the rest of his work.
You mentioned the Barrel release, and we should probably clarify because that just sounds weird. A company called Barrel, which I'm not familiar with their work too much other than this one release that they did back in 2007, I think it was, where it's a double disc set of this movie with both cuts and a ton of extras. I've referenced the commentary multiple times. Great commentary track, really put together with care. But as far as I know, there's no Blu-ray of this in sight yet. So I'm hoping that they get on track and somebody releases this on Blu-ray because I think it really deserves it. And the film, even on DVD, looks freaking fantastic. And I can't imagine how nice this would be if it was presented as a restored Blu-ray version.
I can share some news about that. While I don't know of a specific Blu-ray that is in production as we speak, what I do know is that in 2023, the film was selected by one of the European film commissions. Basically, what they do is they take a number of films every year and fund their complete and total professional restoration in tandem with the director if they're still around, which in this case, Kumel is. So Malpertuis was one of the films that was selected in 2023 for this. So they've completely restored it from the negatives. I think both the negatives from the Cannes version and the director's cut, he's had more say over the film than he ever has. And it's just been completely restored. It's touring Europe. I think it's had a screening in Brussels. I think it's screening in Italy earlier this year. It's got all the signs that, yes, at some point we will get that. And I'm really excited about that.
That's fantastic.
When you see a good quality version of Daughters of Darkness, it's such a beautiful film, so beautifully shot. And I feel the existing release of Malpertuis hints at what this might look like, but I can only imagine how great this will look in a restored version, because the potential's there for this to be a real revelation.
Yeah, this film really strikes me as one, and I feel like I say this about a lot of films that I really love it. Once it gets out there and more people are able to see it in all its glory, that it will just inspire a whole new generation of fans. I think people will really fall in love with it.
I completely agree. And once again, thank you so much for introducing me to this film, because it took a lot to get me to finally sit down and watch it.
I'm happy to share the love.
All right, let's go ahead and take another break and play a preview for next week's show right after these brief messages.
The Silent Hour is new today on digital. Joel Kinnaman stars as a detective guarding a deaf witness marked for death after seeing a gang murder. Trapped by the killers, they have to outsmart them to survive. Buy or rent The Silent Hour now. Rated R from Republic Pictures.
Own or rent Twisters on digital now, or look for the 4K Ultra HD and Blu-ray on October 22nd. The blockbuster disaster epic starring Daisy Edgar Jones, Glenn Powell, and Anthony Ramos is packed with a whirlwind of heart-stopping action and exhilarating thrills. We Live Entertainment calls Twisters the perfect blockbuster. Watch at home now with over 1 hour of exclusive bonus content.
It is 1995.
Open season!
Hunting is the national sport, and people are the prey. The world is ruled by a strict regime. They're going to make obedient little citizens out of us.
Who are?
Society.
What do you mean?
Step out of line, and they take you to the funny farm. You could die laughing.
All you have to do is lead my guests on a chase for one day. A little sport.
You're going to kill us?
Not necessarily. You might survive.
Is everybody ready?
Come on, you big piece of shit.
You come to me.
I'm the one you can't break. I'm what you've been afraid of all your life.
I'm afraid of nothing.
You're afraid of failing.
And now, my little flower. Yes, I'm going to taste your honey.
It is less the size of one's gun that counts, or the skill with which it's used.
Don't you kill him, Jennifer. He's my target. This is Thatcher. The hunt is over. Shoot on sight, shoot to kill.
Let me come with you.
No way.
Please take me with you. Don't leave me here.
The hunters and the hunted. The quick and the dead.
Oh, shit! Oh.
Who will survive the blood and thunder shocker of the year?
That's right, we'll be back next week with a look at Turkey Shoot. Until then, I want to thank my co-hosts for this week, Jessica and Matthew. So Matthew, what have you been up to lately?
I've been teaching a lot. My online courses, film courses, take up a lot of my time, but I've got a new course on Italian cinema of the 60s that I'm putting together right now. And yeah, that's taking up most of my time, but I'm also writing and working on Blu-ray commentaries.
I could definitely use that class because I don't know that much about Italian films from the 60s.
Come along. You're very welcome, Mike.
And Jessica, what's new in your world?
Not too much since the last time I was on. I've done a few sort of writing things that are in some kind of embryonic state and hopefully will make it to full fruition at some point. But yeah, other than that, I guess maybe for those who are interested in Belgian art, I can point you to my Instagram, which is labelleotero, la.bell.otero. And I post, especially recently, images that are in my psyche for various reasons because of other things in my life that are unrelated. Lately, a lot of Belgian surrealism has been making its way into the feed. So if you want to look at some of these images that I've spoken about, you can check out my Instagram and see some of them there.
I highly recommend Jessica's Instagram. It's very entertaining.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, guys, for being on the show. Thanks to everybody for listening. If you want to hear more of me shooting off my mouth, check out some of the other shows that I work on. They are all available at weirdingwaymedia.com. Thanks especially to our Patreon community. If you want to join the community, visit patreon.com/projectionbooth. Every donation we get helps the projection booth take over the world.